Recorded. Yes, my dear students. So today our topic that I have chosen to begin with in this online class that is joined by almost more than 50 students so far, and I'll continue to add as many as they as and when they come and join me. So the importance of second language learning theories when we study a course on English language teaching or TESOL. You know, you being the students of English language teaching need to realize what theories been under discussion for last more than 100 years. And the purpose of learning these theories is simply to realize and understand how this philosophical and linguistic divide has dominated the history of English language teaching and English language learning. So these theories are in fact very, very important for the students of linguistics and also for the students of literature. Because sometimes people will ask you these questions, and maybe in your interviews, of course, in your exams, anywhere, what are the leading language learning theories? No, we are only talking about language learning theories, not language teaching theories. When it comes to language teaching theories, then we'll have to put our discussion on that part of the topic, which might be in the next meeting or next topic, which is approaches, methods in language teaching. So today we only focus on theories of English language learning and why should we learn them and how important it is for all of us. In the beginning, I must tell you one very interesting thing, that language learning had been consistently under a very powerful academic debate for last 50 years. Now, the debate is largely divided into two dimensions, I should say, into two schools of philosophy or two schools of thought. One school of thought believes that language teaching or language learning or language acquisition is a process which is inbuilt. Human is born with these abilities, and all it needs is a little push, and then he will begin to grow language skills more or less the way he begins to grow in flesh and bones. The other school of thought and other school of philosophy or psychology, I should say, or in linguistics for that matter, believe that language learning is an external process. An external process, which means you need teachers, you need to go to a school, you need to have some kind of behavior to guide you, to demonstrate you, and to let you learn and expose yourself to any language that you're learning. So, I mean, broadly, the debate is divided into these two dimensions. Let us see one by one what these great scholars and linguists and philosophers have been talking about. So in this list of theorists, linguists, and philosophers, I have chosen first Plato. Now, of course, Plato is a very popular name, and because of his other works in politics, his familiar work on republics, very commonly cited in political world, and then his another concept about idealism is very popular and very much criticized also. But his concept about linguistics is also very important. Now, what he fundamentally believed in the acquisition of language, or in the learning of language, I should say, he used a very interesting phrase and that was known as the nature versus the this is what I'm just trying to say, nature versus the nurture debate. Now, this was the first time that in 5th century BC, we have a Greek philosopher talking about this. We all have some other references to Plato in our English literature also, but this time he gave this principle of nature versus nurture. And it is a kind of a balance, you know, that you have got naturally something to speak language, to learn language, and to acquire language. But he believes that, yes, for further development or for further uh, growth in your linguistic skills, you need to have some kind of a nurture, some kind of a training, some kind of guidance, some kind of information. And this is just the beginning that we see in history. Then the second name we see was after a very long time, more than 2000 years, because this is the period of more or less the Dark Ages, and then 15th, 14th century Renaissance period. Then in 17th century, we have a French philosopher, Descartes. He also agreed with the Plato's views that what he said, he believed in the innateness of language, because he thought it reflected the general rationality of human beings. Yes, that was very true. That is very true, that there is something innate, and a human cannot be born deaf and dumb, and he has got some biological organs like his tongue, his lips, his vocal cavities, his phonetic organs of his throat. So he has got all these instruments, biological instruments, to produce the kind of communicative function. So he believed that it is very rational to have this innate ability in all humans. Then we have Locke, who is also uh, very famous for his political works, but he also wrote about linguistics and human brain when he was born. He said the humans are born with a blank slate. Very interesting. He rejected the previous ideas. He said there is nothing inbuilt in human. There's nothing innate in human. Every human is born with a, you know, he has a broader concept of a free will. And that's why he was more popular about liberalism and talking about freedom, more like Rousseau and many others in 17th century. So he's just born with a blank slate, and all he is going to do is the idea that the knowledge comes from the outside world and through sensory experience rather than through innate knowledge that we have at birth. So he does not believe in this philosophy of innateness. Then we have, very importantly, cognitive theory of language learning. Now, Jan Piaget, another French, came up with this notion in 1935 about cognitive theory. Now, I tell you, cognitive theory is largely the same theory that dominated the world almost for 100 years. And in other words, I can say this is the theory that talked about the teaching of language through grammar. So what actually it simply explained that it is the knowing of language more important than the using of language. You see, history has its own dynamics. We live in 21st century, so we know the demands and the manifestation of 21st century. But we cannot really imagine 100 years ago the world as 100 years ago it was. People would see differently. So he thought that learning a language is only possible once somebody learns grammar. So in a sense that his focus was on the cognitive side. He believed that everything in terms of knowledge should first be learned, not the rules, not the use of language. So in a way, when we have got two phrases, knowing the language and using the language, he is the one who propagated the idea of knowing language, knowing the grammar of language, getting expertise in roles. Now, his idea of cognitive knowledge of language actually spread very far and wide in the world. And this is where we see that it leads us to the orientations of grammar translation method, that you got to learn language by having good grip on grammar and good grip on translation and good grip of rules and etc., but no use at all. So you see the impact of this theory of cognitive knowledge based learning of language dominated the world for more than 100 years or even more than that. Now, until we reach in 1960s, when we have the behaviorists coming up talking about language as something, that language is a behavior. This is absolutely exciting for people at that time, even people who learn language today, to realize how language can behave. We say humans behave, students behave, teachers behave, but if you remember, I always say that language is also the name of a behavior. When we learn any language, we have its small units, its phrases, its beautiful words fitting together, making meaningful expressions for all of us. So all these are worded as if they are behaving in particular contexts with particular meaning and with a particular function. So B.F. Skinner's contribution was very vital uh, in this theory of language learning. And he believed that what actually is required is that you may learn rules, but you cannot be a good expert of language. You can never be using language properly until you receive an appropriate response from the receivers. So, I mean, if you speak language and with somebody, and how the language you speak behaves and how is that responded is very, very interesting. So that was, somewhat considered to be a behavioristic approach. That language learning is not as as something innate, but it depends on others, that are people around you. Yes, you use language, or you speak language, or you read it, you write it, but how is that responded, and how the behavior of language is received by others. And so this means that learning of a language will depend on the stimuli or on the impact of other people who are there to uh, to maybe correct you if you are doing something wrong, or if you are just using the language. So this is what B.F. Skinner's popularity is about, that language again is not something innate. It depends on the external behavior, because itself language is a kind of a behavior. So it grows with the behavior of the people who listen to it. How do they respond to it? So that's some dimension of it. Then we have the most dominating theory of language learning introduced by Noam Chomsky, American linguist in 1970s. Now, Chomsky's idea has been dominating the world like a thriller. What he brought again, more or less what Plato thought, what Descartes thought, and his idea was that language is uh, uh, something innate, and he believed that uh, Chomsky saw that language is an innate device for language acquisition. What Skinner understood to be conditioning according to particular events, Chomsky understood to be the result of the universal elements that structure all languages. And then you see, Chomsky's concept was of language acquisition device. Every human is born with language acquisition device. And because he believes that every human is born with the same language acquisition device, so the rules of grammar are somewhat common in all languages. And these rules then he termed as universal grammar. So, which means that, of course, then we have the studies of discourse analysis where we find some principles and parameters of language, and there are some principles which are common and some parameters which are not common in different languages. But he then came up and has established until now a very strong and a firm view, rather a philosophy, that language is an innate device. Yes, it needs a stimulus, it needs a course of instruction, it needs an external element, but basically humans are born with this great gift, this great ability of language and ability to communicate to others. Then after 70s and early 80s, late 70s, we have another theory, which is by John Schumann, that was known as a acculturation model. Now, acculturation model was also very popular in terms of learning. You see, and what is this acculturation model? The word acculturation, partly looks like as if it is derived from the word culture. This model talked about how people learn language by becoming part of another culture. For example, if you travel to America, you are an immigrant and you learn very quickly the language of that country. And there were studies and there were very good results indicating that somebody who travels abroad and moves into another country, it becomes very easy for him to learn that language. So these people, linguists, thought that just we can learn language on the same pattern, which is largely living into the environment of that target language. So I mean, acculturation model is largely dependent on of a person learning a language by becoming part of another community of language users. You can have an example, like I can give you my own example. I've lived in an Arab country for about a year. I could speak Arabic in a very good way. And I've lived in England, I lived in America, so it was very difficult for me to just get the accent of Britain, then also in the United States. But then, over the last 10 years or more than that, you live in this country, so you again come up to settle with your own variety of English, your own accent in this country. So otherwise, language has a lot of cultural impact, and that's why we have this acculturation model in place in 1970s and 80s. You see, these are the times then when people and philosophers and thinkers would critically think about all these issues pertaining to the growth of human knowledge. Then very interestingly, we have this Creationist model, which is again still dominating the world. A Creationist model, very interestingly, came up with the fundamental shift of the paradigm that language, that is the second language acquisition process, he believes is the same as the first language. So he had his very strong and powerful ideas, and these ideas are very commonly referred as his hypothesis. You understand the meaning of a hypothesis. It basically is an idea based on something, which could be wrong, which could be correct. So these 5 hypotheses are dominating the world nowadays. So he has written a lot of books. There are a lot of books written. So what he says in his the 5 hypotheses is very interesting. Sorry. And the number 1 hypothesis is that language learning and acquisition hypothesis. Now, language learning, he believed, is something that should be done on the basis of, as we have learned, our first language. As he describes, language acquisition is subconscious. He used the word subconscious. Now, as we learn our first language, subconsciously, you speak your Sindhi, Saraiki, Urdu, whatever language is your language of your parents, you learn it subconsciously. And he calls it language acquisition is something subconscious and results from informal, natural communication. And language learning, on the other hand, is a conscious and a conscious process and is driven by error correction. So it is more formal, which means that you got to go to a teacher and got to go to a school where you get the other part of your language development done, which is the correction, which is more development. So it is language learning and language acquisition different. Language acquisition is something subconscious, and language learning, he believes, is a conscious process of acquiring the language. Then the second idea, the second hypothesis was the natural order hypothesis, which he believes, in which he talks about the grammar structures are also acquired in a predictable order. And he believes language acquisition occurs with comprehensible input, uh, either hearing or reading things that are just slightly above our current language. So he said that the grammatical side of the language also keeps up, uh, you know, growing once you begin to expose yourself to external structures. So he said it is also natural that you begin to speak grammatically correct English with the passage of time by listening to others, by listening to the structures that the other people use. Sometimes these might be above your level, but with the passage of time, you receive the kind of correction and you begin to copy, imitate, and reproduce those structures. The third hypothesis that Christian talked about was, I thought many students of linguistics have already done this study of these hypotheses. But these are all very important for us to remember them. That's why I thought briefly we should go through it. So the third one is the monitor hypothesis. Now, very interestingly, he has used the word monitor. Maybe at that time, the monitors were new in 1980s, early 80s. And he used that the human brain is just like a monitor and an editor. What he explains that a monitor is anything that corrects your language performance and pressures one to communicate correctly and not just convey meaning, such as language teacher who corrects you when you make grammatical mistakes. So, I mean, this is what actually is the monitor hypothesis, where you get yourself corrected by yourself or by the teacher or by somebody who is going to do your correction work. The fourth one is the input hypothesis. Now, this is also very interesting. Your language acquisition depends largely on how and what you receive. And what you receive, like we say, listening skills. You can only speak good language skills once you have good listening skills. So that is where you receive a very good input, then only you can produce very good output. So the input hypothesis, he is trying to indicate and suggest that language can be learned by having very good exposure to the listening side of it. And third, and this is how people acquire that. And then the last here that are with me, the order that I am following, is the affective filter hypothesis. Now, what he says about affective filter hypothesis is that it is a kind of a mental block caused by affective factors that prevents input from reaching the language acquisition device. Now, he says our mind sometimes does not allow many language skills to grow. Why it happens? It happens because of the external influence, that you've got teachers who are focusing more on accuracy, that you fear from your teachers, you fear from your environment, you fear the external hesitations. So you come under a kind of a block, some kind of a mental block. So, and that affects your growth of the language, and which ultimately uh, does not let your language acquisition device grow as fast, as quickly as your first language is. Because when you are learning your first language, you do not have these mental blocks and fears of using language inaccurately or maybe some other way. So, my dear students, I will just stick to these five uh, hypotheses and these, I should say, seven commonly referred English language learning theories. I should say these are language learning theories will be more appropriate, because this could be with every language, not necessarily with English. So I would like you to have a good study of this handout that I'm going to share with you also on the LMS and website, and then I'll be also sharing it on the WhatsApp and Facebook for all of your reference, and also be sharing with you the the resources that you need to understand. Broadly, again, I would say that whenever you study something, you never forget the purpose of it. You take a class, why you are here with me for last, let us say 45 minutes, why you are here, because you are here because you want to get an idea about the impact and the orientation of language theories that had been popular in last 100 years. I mean, these are just words like cognitive theories, like Creation's theory of SLA, like universal grammar. Well, you see the term is universal grammar, but basically it is a kind of a theory. You got Plato's concept, Descartes' concept, you got Locke's approach, and the phrase that he used first and last, philosophers that use this, that a human mind is just like a blank slate. I hope you all understand the slate. Then the behaviorists also who talk about something. So briefly, this division of language, either an innate mechanism uh, or an external behavior or an outside stimulus is something that is of very important nature for all the English language learners and English language teachers, at least to have an idea. So that once we talk about methods, you'll see that all these methods, one or the other way, will be connected with these theories. Because these teachers later, in the later half of the 20th century, had designed these methods based on all these theories of learning languages. So with this, I conclude my talk, and I would like to let anybody ask questions if you have, please, one by one. Yes, anybody, any question? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, I don't have any question.
All right. Well, if you do
Sir,
not have any
Assalamu alaikum.
question, okay, walaikum salam.
Sir, I have a question that does our first language affects our learning of our second language? I mean, the interlanguage effect that affects our uh, grammar of first language. If we are Sindhi, then the process or structure of our Sindhi language is subject, object, and then verb, or subject, verb, and object. Then it does it affects our second language learning? My
Okay,
question is that.
yes. Okay, fine. That's a very good question, actually. And now you see, this is what I said. Every language has its own principles and parameters. So when
Yes,
we
sir.
say that the first language affects the second language or the target language, it is the same way. I mean, in the arrangement of the sentence. Sometimes we use the same structure of Sindhi or Urdu when we are using English. This will happen. And this is
Yes,
the
sir.
impact of the first language. This will happen. But this will gradually, you consider the words nurture, you consider the words behavior, you consider the word external stimulus, you consider the word correction. So once you receive that correction, once you receive that response, you'll begin to change. But that does not mean that it will stop the fundamental function of language, which is to communicate. You can still
Yes, sir.
communicate with whatever the structure you use for the sentence under the influence of L1, but its communicative
Yes.
functions will continue. So the language teaching or learning ideals are that language must achieve communicative goals. So with whatever structure it is of secondary importance. In other words, as we talk about accuracy, fluency, debate, so either accuracy first or fluency first. So we have a lot of research that it is the fluency which comes before accuracy.
Yes,
So once
sir.
you are
Sir,
fluent, gradually you will begin to rectify your errors and correct your mistakes. Yes,
Of
please.
course, sir.
Assalamualaikum, sir.
Alaikum salam.
There is a question that does the external stimuli affects the innate abilities? Like as you said that we have some of the we have a fear of public speaking. Like when many of the people have a fear of the public speaking, and that external stimuli actually affects our acquisition on the second language. Like as a we are afraid of speaking in front of the people, in front of our colleagues, in front of the teacher. We think that maybe my behavior affects on the words I'm saying. So how to overcome from that condition?
Yes, very good, Zubair. You know, you're right. You know, where actually, if we see this problem comes from the system of language learning and teaching in this country. From day one in your class, you experience this fear. Your teachers never taught you to go ahead with the language skills that you have. You could not have the confidence in from day one in your English language classes. Maybe it was class 6, class 7, or class 10, whatever it was. I think English is largely from class 6, but nowadays it is from class 1. So unfortunately, I would say this problem comes from our, from our pedagogical frontiers. Like our teachers have never understood the the real requirements and the functions of teaching a language. So it is because of that. If your teachers would have taught you from the day one that do anything that comes, speak anything that comes. Mistakes are not always mistakes. Just move into it. Like you see the acculturation model. What is a culturation model? It says when you are in a foreign country, do you take care of what people will say when you are going on shopping for milk in any shop? How would you talk to the merchant? How would you talk to the shopkeeper? How would you talk to a person in the airport? How would you talk to a person on the street and riding a bus? You would never be feeling that fear at all. So you very quickly learn that language. So I think this is because of our teachers, because of the education system, unfortunately. So you now, as the new future generation teachers, will have to realize right from the very beginning that our young learners of language, young students of language learning should not be, you know, grown up into this kind of a fear. They should be accepted with whatever structures they reproduce. And I think this is where once they get going, they will have the confidence. Once they remove the fear and hesitation, they will keep going and will gain the real function of language, which is communication, very soon. Thank you. Next question. Yes, Mohammed.
Sir, I want your personal views regarding the B.F. Skinner's experiment. That how do you see the experiment of B.F. Skinner, sir? Was it a kind of rational experiment or not, as he kept an animal right under his observation to figure out or check out the abilities of human regarding the language.
Yes, okay, I would not look into that part of his theory. What I would look into the part of his theory was behavioristic, like how a teacher, when he teaches a language in a class, he can improve the language of his students by the behavior in his class. Many a times you would have noticed in your classrooms that students make mistakes. For example, a student is asking the teacher to give me give me the handouts, give me your pen, sir. But the teacher would say, well, do you want me to lend you the pen? Or should I give you the pen? So the difference between give you a pen, giving a pen, and lending a pen. So, I mean, it is the behavior of a teacher that he can reform, improve, and correct the language of his students. So once the students have started, the other people around him, through their behavior, through their response, can improve the language. So I only stick to this part of B.F. Skinner's theory, which I think I agree to it. I mean, that's a very good idea. But I disagree with his complete rejection of the innate model. I agree with the universal grammar theory that Chomsky has been talking about, that that he didn't say like that, but we are gifted with this innate ability. Yes, any more questions? We got two people. Yes, any more questions before I close this? And then you can also type here. Yes, Javeria Baloch.
Sir, I have a question about acculturation model. Sir, it's written that social interaction and using language is used in this model. But how is it innate, sir?
I'm not saying it is
Like
innate.
using language.
I did
Sir,
not
it
say
is
this is.
written in the column of innate.
No, well, that might be some data here and back and forth. You stick to my explanation. I will see if it is, it has crossed the column into another column. But basically, when we say culturation model, means you learn language from the culture you become part of. And this is where
So it is outside stimulus.
I gave you the example. I'll just see the handout and make correction and then upload it. But you see, when I say culturation model, simply it is very largely referred to the immigrants. When you are an immigrant coming to like countries like US or Britain or Canada, you can or any other country, you can very easily learn language. So that experience and that process of acquiring language has some message for us to understand. How is that we begin to learn that language, I mean, without any teacher, without anything? But yes, then the culturation model also indicates that once you're through language, once you're exposed to it, then it's not difficult it becomes very easy to polish your language and do the rectification work or the correction work, and then you can just be part of that community.
Right, sir.
Sir,
Thank you.
I have
It's
a
like
question.
we have people from the other provinces, sir. Just like Sindhi Pathans, we have
Oh,
they
beautiful example.
merely speak.
Yes, you're right, Zubair Ahmed. That's a beautiful example. Your Pathans and Punjabis from the province of Punjab, they live here for many decades, and you see the beautiful Sindhi and language they use. Yes, any more questions?
Sir, I have a question, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, there is a question that confuses me a lot, that how does language affect our thinking, sir?
Yes, it affects of our thinking. If we are good in the use of that language, then it is going to be a positive, uh, indication that we are going to grow. But if we are not good in the use of that language, it is going to rather, reduce our thinking skills, our mental growth, our intellectual growth, our efficiency. Of course, it is going to be a barrier. This is what I used the word last time as a barrier. linguistic barriers are these, that it will not let your brain grow if it is your barrier. So language learning can be a barrier if you are not coping up with the problems that come on the process of your language learning. If you are handling with them, if you have overcome them, if you're very good with them, and I think it's not difficult, it's very easy. But the students, I have also experienced such students who live under the fear, under the hesitation, under a lot of psychological, pressures. Even I found many students trembling in classes simply. So if you're in this kind of situation, then of course it is going to decrease your intellectual and uh, uh, your linguistic skills. And that's what
Uh,
the affective filter hypothesis is. The question's affective filter hypothesis is this: if the external pressures are going to affect your that device which is inside your brain. Yes, Riazali.
yes, sir. I had a question regarding parameters of language. I could not get your point about parameters of language.
You know,
Please, yes,
parameters
sir.
of a language are those, like, as there was a question that there is in Sindhi we have a language, and in English we have a structure of language. So we have two sentences, one from in Sindhi and one in Urdu. Sorry, one in English. Now, if I say I speak English, but in Sindhi I will say Ma Angrezi ॻाल्हायां थो. Now, in
Yes, sir.
English, when I used, I had put, I speak English in the last. So subject, verb, object. But in Sindhi, it
It
is subject, object, and then verb. So I mean, you see the words and these different parts of speech fitting differently in each language. Some languages these are common, in some languages these are different. Like I gave you the example of English and Sindhi.
Thank you, sir. It is the difference of order of words.
Yeah, it is how the words vary their positions in a sentence.
Thank you,
Yes, any
sir.
more questions?
Joining us.
Sir, I have another question, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, do thoughts control the language or language does?
I would say it is vice versa. It is both. If you got very good thoughts, and sometimes language is considered to be dress of thought. So if you got beautiful thoughts, but you do not find words to express it, so it is a kind of impediment, a kind of
Actually,
hindrance.
sir, sometimes we possess very good quality of very good quality of thoughts, but we are often unable to speak. Sir, where does the problem lie, sir?
Problem is with the choice of words. You have very little choice of phrases, words, and sentences. I mean, you are not uh, stable enough in the efficient use of that language. So language becomes then your barrier. Language becomes your barrier. You are very intelligent. What is the problem with the cognitive theory of language learning? That the students are very clever. They cram all the rules. They become experts in all the rules of language, but they're not able to use them. I'll give you a little example. Go to a high school teacher who teaches English to class 10 in any school, any government school. You see, he's teaching all the grammar, beginning from active voice, passive voice, to direct speeches, to the structures, to the conditional, everything he teaches. He knows it. But he does not use English. He cannot speak English because he cannot speak while he is teaching English. He is teaching English by using Sindhi or Urdu language. So will be the impact on the students also. They'll
Yes,
be
sir.
learning the rules cramming the rules, mastering the rules, but will never be able to use these rules in any context. So language, unfortunately then learning becomes completely decontextualized. And it becomes then, when you come out of the institution, it becomes a great barrier for all of you to face day-to-day challenges in the everyday life situation.
It means, sir, we have summarized the natural phenomena in a syllabus. That is what the hindrance is.
Yes, I mean, yeah, it is. It is. We'll have to understand the nature of language. Nature of language is not just cramming the rules or just getting the command on the structure or on the arrangement of words or on the rules that are required, but the language learning requires you to have to learn it, to communicate in it. We learn it but are not able to communicate in it. So where is the problem? Problem is our learning, in our learning approach. Our learning approach is on the part of our teacher or our student. Our approach is that I want my students to write correct sentences. That's it. A teacher doesn't aim to inform the student from the day one that, look, I'm teaching you these structures, and at the end of this class, you are going to use these structures. If you see your college at English language learning experience, your school English language learning experience, you would have seen this, that you would never put in a situation where you used those structures. I mean, we can easily make active voice or passive voice, but we cannot use passive voice in daily life situations. So that is a problem in the system, but hopefully all of you are going to learn it and realize that where is the problem, and then we'll definitely rectify it. Any more? And I should say the last question before I close this, because we have still people coming in. Yes, any question before we close it? All right. So my dear students, today I conclude this talk, and we'll see you tomorrow again on the same time, and we'll then discuss our another important topic that we already have discussed, but we'll try to review it very briefly on approaches and methods in English language teaching. Thank you very much. Take a special care of yourself. See you again, inshallah. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you, sir. Take care. You too.